Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack, back in to bring you all the info you need for this Shaman revamp, especially for Resto Shaman. They finally, of course, have their overall class buff in Sky Fury, which is a buff you're applying just like you would with Powered Fortitude or any of those other buffs, providing mastery, and of course that Wind Fury effect getting rolled into it. So Shaman finally actually has a raid buff in its baseline. It's fantastic. But on top of that, there's also been some really distinct changes for both the class tree and the spec tree. So going into it, the class tree is so much better because they have streamlined a lot of talent point nodes, especially like 2-point nodes, which leveled up, a little bit of healing here. You'd have a bit more healing out of your healing stream totem, or you'd have a little bit more output from, one ability, or a little bit more crit here. And now so many of them are just 1-pointers that you are going to be looking at. It makes it significantly easier to get some of the more mandatory cooldowns and talents, things like Totemic Recall, Ancestral Guidance, Totemic Projection, which is pretty big if you wanted to run with Totem Shaman, which we'll talk about a little later. But you also get access to a defensive. I mean, it's like Christmas for Shamans. They get a raid buff and you get another defensive in Stone Bulwark Totem. This one is, I would not say it's going to be an insane defensive, but like, come on, Shamans, like having something's better than nothing. It's about like a mil in terms of instant shielding, which is about a quarter of your health, and then it continually adds a little bit more shielding. So it does quite a bit to sort of soak up an initial hit and give you a bit better survivability. And it's going to be one of your capstone talents at the end of the tree, and it's not too difficult to be able to have access to. So I think it's a really nice addition, especially when you consider some talents like, taking Earth Elemental and then taking like 5% damage reduction when you activate your Earth Elemental are like each an individual point. So this is significantly better. I feel like I can really easily take, obviously, the mandatory totems on hand, but I can flex into Poison Cleansing, I can flex into Fear Totem, I can flex into Speed Totem, I can flex into all of these things really easily if I wanted to. So overall, I think the class tree is massively improved from where it once was. The spec tree, however, is kind of interesting. There's notably a number of sections, most of them are related to Riptide, that are not fully implemented yet, not working properly. They have a bunch of zeros kind of filled out onto the tree. But even just looking at them on paper, they don't really seem like they, at least from an M+ perspective, are going to be like huge winners. And from like a rating perspective, it's a little odd because I already see how like fleshed out both the hero talents can kind of interact with a really heavy chain heal build. So I feel like they'd have to really make a lot of improvements to like a Riptide setup to make it look a little bit more like powerful, more interesting. Some of the 2-pointers like Tidebringer, for example, are now going to be just 1 point, which is fantastic. Ancestral Vigor, super easy to get. You're able to path into like Healing Rain, Acid Rain really super easily. And it's nice that there is a really good divide between like Riptide centric talents and like chain heal centric talents. And what I mean by that is in the old tree, you had to route into Primordial Wave first, which is having the Riptides activating Healing Wave onto all of your allies. You kind of cast a Riptide, it's the Covenant ability, and then your next Healing Wave hits Healing Wave on everybody. But you had to route through that to get to Tidebringer, to get to High Tide. And thankfully, you don't have to worry about those kind of things any longer. And there's just a nice sort of separation. You also are notably getting even more defensive power, which is nice for Shamans, but it also bothers me on like a macro level that like the defensive bloat kind of continues. You have something like Earthen Harmony, which is giving you 5% damage reduction to your Earth Shield target. And since you can run with double Earth Shield through your class talents, you can actually have that up on yourself permanently. And so just like the Stone Bulwark Totem we talked about earlier, you're getting a little more defensive value, getting a little bit more resources on hand. So it's got to be a massive win for Shamans as they've been starved for defenses for such a long time. However, there's also a really fun talent I've been enjoying a ton. It's called Master of the Elements. This is one where your lava bursts are actually stacking up a healing bonus for your Healing Surge. And it's increasing the healing of Healing Surge by 30%. And then when you cast and spend that resource, then when you successfully cast those Healing Surges onto allies, you're applying Flame Shocks to nearby enemies. So you're immediately able to get a good feedback loop when you need to spot heal people to be able to also increase your damage and get some of those lava burst procs, which are now baseline. So you can quickly be hucking meatballs at enemies left from right while you're doing some of your spot healing, which you're doing a little bit more of thanks to some of our hero talents. Most of the time I've been playing Shaman has been with Totemic, although we did talk about Farseer, we're going to talk about it in a sec. But with Totemic, I've just loved being able to have the time spent away from maintaining and babysitting my healing rain. And with the talent revamp, I think Totemic Shaman feels even better than it already did. So adding on top of the talent adjustments that we've already had, the spec feels very streamlined, just very straightforward. They've made an adjustment to Healing Stream Totem's synergistic talent living stream, where it is now making your Healing Stream Totem do 100% more healing when you've activated it and then decay it over time. And what this really ends up boiling down to is that when you play with Totemic Shaman, you hit your Healing Stream Totem, and thanks to, I think it's called Lively Totems from the Totemic Tree, you're also casting full strength chain heals, which benefit from Tidebringer, High Tide, and Tidal Waves. So you activate that Healing Stream Totem, and you're unleashing a huge burst of output, both from the totem itself and from the chain heal. And it's making it so it doesn't feel like your totem activation is sort of like delayed gratification. It is instantly providing you value, and it's instantly helping you heal, which I really, really love. And we'll talk about it compared to Farseer in just a sec. And so your burstiness, your way you can respond to heavy damage, is almost just like a snap. You are activating a lot of free chain heals along the way, which seems to really save you a lot of mana. There were a number of dungeons I was testing on where I didn't bring mage food with me, so you might see my mana be really poor in some of this footage, but it actually wasn't as bad as I guess you could say it appears. We'd have some pulls where I just would burn my entire mana bar down, having to cast to keep people alive, but then like the rest of the time, I was able to play like pretty mana neutral thanks to the strength of like Healing Stream Totem casting those chain heals for me. I probably could have spec'd into Mana Tide Totem. I still feel like the spec is going to have to naturally drink at least a little bit, but there's always going to be areas, especially in an M+ environment, where you can actually just take the time to be able to drink. So I don't think it was that bad at all. And so just keep that in mind. I didn't actually have mage food. The vendors on the PTR are not actually selling you like drinkable water. It's all like white items. But anyway, one of the other things that is so nice about Totemic Shaman is how it just makes your totems larger, which is really significant for the improvement they've made to Spirit Link Totem. So Spirit Link Totem, of course, used to have this banger Azurite trait in BFA called Spouting Spirits. Well, now it's back. And so not only is your totem field going to be larger thanks to Totemic, but you're also providing more damage reduction thanks to Spouting Spirits to a total of 15% damage reduction to your allies, redirecting the health pool, and bursting for a very significant amount of healing. And so, yeah, you have your raid buff that you're providing now with Sky Fury, and then you're also able to redirect everyone's health pools and equalize them extremely easily thanks to Spirit Link, making it not only a like safety utility tool, but also a really strong output tool, which is really significant for a dungeon environment because it's also casting the chain heal from Totemic Shaman. So you are bursting for a ton of healing, equalizing everyone's health pool, and casting a full strength chain heal, which is also going to be helping you spread around just crazy amounts of output. And so as a result, it adds even more value and even more like cooldowns that you can sort of lean upon, which is really ironic because not too long ago they were nerfing Ascendance, and now with this talent revamp, you could take a 2-minute Ascendance if you wanted the talent into it. And so as a result, I'm playing like 2-minute Ascendance, deeply rooted elements, which procs Ascendance, and I have vast resources at my disposal with Ancestral Guidance, with Healing Tide Totem also casting chain heals, Spirit Link Totem casting chain heals, Healing Stream Totem casting chain heals, and so a lot of the times, as I mentioned earlier with the Spec Tree, I can actually take advantage of things like Master of the Elements. I can actually cast Surges, which apply Flame Shocks, and then start hucking meatballs, and actually feel like I can actively press buttons that are doing damage when I'm playing Totemic. I can actually let my Healing Rain do its thing, and if I need to move, I have Totemic Projection on hand to be able to adjust its position and keep the damage flowing. Overall, I think Totemic Shaman is insanely fun to play. Performs really well. It kind of gives you these like, oh crap moments so that you can bounce back from really heavy damage events that you may not be prepared for. And since you're rolling abilities in together, it feels like you actually have some time to be able to deal damage once you have everyone topped off. So I'm a huge fan of Totemic Shaman and how it plays. On the side of Farseer Shaman, they have made some significant improvements. Notably, the first one is that it used to only be that Unleash Life was going to proc your ancestors, your old grandpa, to be able to help you with a lot of the healing. Now it also procs off of Undulation, which is of course every 3 healing waves, healing surges, you're going to have that bonus output. So now you can just passively summon grandpa and grandma to be able to help you heal your allies. Fantastic. Also helps with damage too. From my priest background, it feels a lot like Divine Image. You have, your cool glowy friend around to be able to help you throughout your problems. That being said, especially coming from playing with Totemic Shaman, it feels like I'm back to playing lots of maintenance once again. One of the new talents that we haven't talked about is a revamp of an old talent. It's called Downpour. And so whenever you cast Healing Rain, and it also works for Surging Totem as well, you are then getting an ability replacing your Healing Rain or your Surging Totem button, where you can just press it again and then it bursts for healing in the radius of your Healing Rain field, and which is fantastic if everyone's stacked. You can just put down Healing Rain and just hit another button and burst for immediate output. That being said, when you play something like Farseer, where you're casting your rain every 10-something seconds, then you have another button which costs a GCD to be able to actually take advantage of. You might like this in a raid environment, and you can have that constant, almost free, it's pretty low cost healing from something like Downpour. But when you run Totemic Shaman, it's also naturally hitting harder because you have a special adjustment they've made to it, since Surging Totem has a longer duration and a longer cooldown than regular Healing Rain. So it doesn't really feel like you get an extra advantage out of something like Downpour, at least right now from the draw. The ancestors themselves feel like they add up to a lot of healing over the course of a dungeon, but it doesn't really feel powerful in the moment. I've noticed this a lot with things like Druid, where like Call of the Elder Druid is allowing your damage to convert into healing, and you might look at the healing log and say, oh wow, it did like 4% of my healing, like that's great. But the moments where you take advantage of it are the moments where there's like lots of downtime. And there's a lot of times I feel like I see the ancestor healing quite a bit when, I'm just ending the burst of damage. It's not assisting me in like pushing up the health pools quickly for the ridiculous burst damage that we're experiencing in beta right now. It's helping a little, but then I also start noticing it as, everyone's already topped or everyone's almost topped off. Continuing from like a maintenance perspective, rather than being able to have, your healing stream totems casting chain heals for you, you're preparing those healing streams to actually do healing before the damage comes out, activating them beforehand since they're not casting any chain heals for you with Farseer, and then you're pre-casting, the chain heals yourself. There's a lot of times that I've seen that happen. It also feels quite a bit worse on the mana perspective because you can't just activate a totem and whip out a chain heal that's benefiting from High Tide. High Tide notably has a time duration, and there's moments where you might want to play Totemic and then just rip a healing stream totem for a low cost and then continue on your merry way with adding damage. Or you play Farseer and it feels like, oh, I have this buff, but I don't really critically need it. And so you can kind of just let it sit there and not end up using it as a result. And so I feel like you really gain and take advantage of every single buff, especially in a dungeon environment, that is coming your way when you play Totemic. But then I feel like a lot of times with Farseer, you almost are like having to make these choices to spend more mana and spend more activity time building up maintenance cooldowns a lot of times in order to actually do like real healing. So I think Farseer might be something that's more weighted. Maybe if it just gets buffed, I think it is kind of undertuned, at least at the moment, compared to Totemic. I think once some kind of changes come around, it might be something that's more raid focused than we would see out of Totemic. Although I gotta say, I really absolutely adore how Totemic Shaman plays. And for the spec as a whole, I think that these changes really make Resto Shaman a powerhouse for Mythic Plus. From a general perspective, they have a knock up. They can also spec into a knock back. They have stuns. They have a really short cooldown on kick. They have poison dispelling totem. They have better defensives than ever. And they have curse dispels. And these dungeons are chocked full of poisons and curse dispels. I can't emphasize enough how much there actually is. It is ridiculous. Also, from the standpoint of just being able to deal with what the dungeons are really throwing at you, obviously, like, really high key pushers are not going to be as dependent upon having to use lots of crowd control to deal with those like level 2 affixes like we would see out of like the orbs, the ascendant affix that kind of rains down from the sky. Yeah, at higher keys it's not going to be as significant, but if you're somebody who's wanting to like pug your way up and actually work your way up the ranks, being able to have all of these shutdowns on your own, being able to have a really good dispel profile, and being able to have lots of kicks and stops makes a massive difference in your success rate in dungeons, because so many times when you're pugging, people are just lasered into their damage meters, and being the healer that can also have a really significant impact on stopping damage events before they happen, stopping enemies from getting buffed by the new affix system, it makes it that much easier to be able to push your way up through the ranks. And so after this rework, and while I realize it's not 100% complete since those Riptide talents still need some work, it does feel like those are a little bit more raid oriented. At least from my experience, I think I've been able to have a really easy time healing a lot of high-end dungeons with a chain heal focused totemic build. I don't think that Shaman has too many weak points really going into the new season for Mythic Plus. And I think that they, while it's early, and while the end number, like the output number, just is like a little asterisk, will matter a lot. You know, if some healer just doesn't do as much healing, then they will not be as good, right? That aside, I think that the way that they're built, I think that the way that they're trending is going to be really powerful for Mythic Plus for the next expansion, and I'm going to be keeping a very, very close eye on it to potentially be one of my alts for the new expansion. I plan to main my priest and then play 2 characters as alts, one of them very likely Fodom, and another I'm enjoying for vibes, and regardless of where Shaman ends up at, I think the vibes for the spec are fantastic. So if you're enjoying this kind of content, be sure to subscribe, and huge thank you to our patrons, Twitch subs, and our YouTube channel members for making all of this possible. If you'd like to join them in support, check it out in the description down below. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch y'all next time.